Recently, I've done a video in which I review Sony LX100, a premium compact camera with 1-inch sensor. Today we are getting at a level above that. I present you the Panasonic Lumix LX100 Mark II with micro 4x3 sensor. But it's not the only standout feature. Its other strong point is built-in Leica 24 to 75mm in equivalent of 35mm f1.7 to f2.8 aperture lens. I can't wait to tell you everything about the performance, but firstly let's quickly take a look at the camera body itself. I don't have any criticism in terms of the build quality. Whole construction feels very solid and it's just on point with the segment. The enclosure is mostly made of the magnesium alloy, accounting even small details like the inner housing of the lens. If you would like to pick holes, you could say for example the dial on the front is little loose and mounted crooked, but that's just unnecessary because as a whole it leaves a great impression. Not to mention the size of this camera. If you watch my channel, you already know that I'm a huge fan of small sized cameras. Smaller and lighter equals better in my opinion. But unfortunately it's not always on par with the performance. So this combination of a big sensor, bright lens and compact body seems very promising. But let's confront it in reality. Inside we have micro 4x3 sensor that has 21 megapixels, but only 17 can be used effectively. That's because of the multi-aspect sensor design, which lets you choose aspect ratio without changes in the angles of view. I'm not sure what to think about that, since its takeaway is that camera won't use the whole sensor area. But I guess Panasonic must have been very proud of this, judging from the presence of this unusual aspect ratio selector on the lens housing. Firstly, let's overview things that I consider downsides. In terms of the level of detail, it is pretty respectable, but honestly I was expecting a little bit more from the bigger micro 4x3 sensor. I don't see that much of an advantage in comparison with 1-inch sensor rivals. But I've already heard the Lumix LX100 is not necessarily the ultimate king when it comes to the sharpness and details. That said, it's still miles ahead of the smartphone cameras and small sensor bridge cameras. You will also generally find increased depth thanks to that bigger sensor. My main gripe with the image quality is the exposure control and dynamic range. Many pictures that I've took were either overexposed or underexposed. Those are definitely things to improve and can especially be disturbing for amateur point-and-shoot users who won't edit their pictures. Look at this landscape. In reality, this bridge was covered with the grass. But you can't see that because it's underexposed. Instead, it looks like a pitch black wall. Last thing that many people find not so appealing is that camera has tendency to produce not so beautiful flare. Now let's go through the things that I did like. Bokeh. I really didn't expect to see so shallow and beautiful depth of field. And I've used quite a few cameras including full frames. Aside from the bright lens alone, this is the thing in where this bigger sensor really does help. Trust me, it's the levels above the Sony LX100 series. This is the camera's major advantage in my opinion. That, in combination with phenomenal macro capability, can produce results which are sometimes really breathtaking. I wish every lens had focusing distance of 3 cm. Low light performance, to be expected, is also better than the small sensor competitors. Very acceptable amount of noise up to ISO 3200. I noticed that those 4x3 sensors really show surprisingly balanced performance in this regard. Moving to the video quality, I know people say this camera is meant for photography, not video. But seriously, show me the cameras made for videographers. Anyway, the video recordings are of pretty good quality. The combination of the bright Leica lens and relatively big sensor again gives a lot of possibilities. It also features very good amount of details and sharpness. Stabilization also works very decent. Autofocus is unfortunately not the fastest, but it is pretty smooth on the other hand. My main issue, just like with the pictures, exposure and dynamic range. And honestly, I wasn't surprised because the other day I watched some car related video on YouTube. Shout out to the Saturday Car Fever, he was using the original Lumix LX100, and whereas I liked the overall quality, I noticed it struggles with the highlights. Color science could also be improved, and it lacks in the picture profiles that videographers certainly would like to have. User interface, like in any Panasonic camera that I've tested, is simply class-leading. You probably won't see that kind of smooth and fast user experience in any other camera. In this regard, many manufacturers are frozen in 2005. That said, menu and settings could be improved to be slightly easier to use, but overall I am pretty happy. Another thing to mention is the interesting and quirky way of handling. There is an aperture ring on the lens and a shutter speed dial on the top, and no usual PASM mode selector. It's weird, but it can be pretty comfortable to use after getting used to. I especially liked and very often use the aperture ring. On the side note, it works great, but it's pretty hard to get it from the automatic position. I guess it is to prevent the accidental changes. So is the Lumix LX100 Mark II worth to buy? If you don't mind the price and mention these advantages, then I would say yes. But if you're on a budget, I would strongly suggest considering the older model. The original LX100 features the same bright lens, but slightly less megapixels. It might perform very similarly though. In conclusion, I really like the combination of bright zoom lens and microphotography sensor, but I wasn't fully satisfied with the image quality in terms of the amount of details, dynamic range and exposure control. Anyway, it is definitely a camera that's worth checking. But for now, check out my other videos. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one. Peace.